Porn bot accounts, China-loving personalities, false narratives, a giant influence machine at work. Let's talk about how China actively uses information and spends billions of dollars in the process to shape the image of China. Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. Xi Jinping says to tell the China story well. Does he want us to tell the true China under communism? Well, if so, are we supposed to hear the mother in chain forced to bear 8 children in rural China, or the group of girls beaten in a barbecue shop and no one to seek justice for them, or the thousands that are left to survive in the recent flood in China? Or does Xi Jinping want us to say that praise for China, praise for Xi Jinping, praise for the CCP, ignoring the problems like human rights, persecution, lack of freedom, and social problems in China? Obviously, the CCP wants us to focus on the latter, or the second one. But think back to before 2020 or before Trump. What was your perception of China? Did you ever feel like you thought once that it was a friendly country, that they are just like us? Well, that was Beijing's charm offense at work, hiding their real intentions and from the public, and then at the same time wage a narrative war on the rest of the world. And at the center of it is an attempt to cognitively change your perception of China. It's a combination of state television censorship, multiple channels of information spreading across the world. It's a massive amount of money put in place to shape the world's view of China. Now, despite COVID-19 and the threat to Taiwan now revealing Beijing as ambitious and dictatorial, the CCP continues to attempt to control the narrative around the country and at the same time attacking others. I had a viewer email me about a question of her being attacked on YouTube when she commented about her being from India, and it drew racist and mean comments from CCP accounts. As well as when I post about Huawei's new phone being a nationalistic facade, it also drew comments bashing me. You'll get this type of response in every digital platform. And you also have comments telling me that, David, why don't you ever talk about something positive about China? What am I supposed to talk about? The CCP controls everything, right? They're everywhere. So talking positive is just powdering up the regime like they did something correct. Now, this isn't to say that the Chinese society or the Chinese people have nothing good or positive. It is simply because the regime has inserted itself into every corner of society that you cannot really talk about them from being a positive side. And where do all these comments or bots or narratives come from? And how do we deal with it? Well, yesterday, heavy rainfall flooded New York. We saw Brooklyn and Queens. The highways are flooded, streets filled with dirty floodwater. It was the perfect opportunity for CCP influencers to make a comparison. Look at us, how well our Chinese infrastructures are comparing to what is happening in New York. We would never have this type of flooding in China. Well, posts like these on Twitter, right? The flood in New York. Quote, let's just say how many drowned people were concealed. That's a blatant lie. We know that the attempt is very clear, right? Forget about the historic flood that just happened recently in China. Forget about how many cities are flooded and how many people died in China because the government discharged dam water to flood the cities. And they downplay and censor everything. And instead, let's focus on New York City's aging infrastructure. So they're always amplifying other troubles and minimizing their own issues. Or this one here, same topic, the New York City subway. It has apparently turned into a tropical rainforest in an instant. According to this person here, the US should lower its stature and learn from China when it comes to infrastructure construction. Sure, let's all live with tofu drag construction like this, right?
我操，回不去了。
And this same type of attempt to influence public opinion has happened with every disaster in the United States. My own family, this is real, right? In China, after watching state television, they would call me and say, hey, are you living in poverty or are you escaping hellfire? Because we saw that there's tornadoes, there's forest fires, and there's homeless people everywhere because something happened in California or in the Midwest or in New York City. And it just shows you that their perception of the rest of the world from the eyes of the CCP state media is that everything is happening outside of China and everything is literally like hell. That's the perception they're getting. Now, this is just one of the millions of ways in which the CCP disseminates false narratives, right? It's mainly targeting the people in China. But we also have to talk about what they do when it comes to influencing the rest of the world. You might see that certain newspapers, they're paid with advertisements to talk about China content in a positive manner. Or you have certain think tanks that you're funded by certain overseas Chinese groups who are also paid by the CCP through the United Front work. And how about the recent riot or looting in Philadelphia? Now, Chinese articles create the idea for readers that all American cities are like this, right? This is a common occurrence in American lives. This title here is a $0 purchase occurred at the Apple Store in Philadelphia, USA. Elon Musk exclaimed, quote, "America will become a clown." So that's the title, right? The goal here is to create a fear around the American society and create peace and relaxation, contrasting that around the Chinese society. Cognitive conditioning. Here's one paragraph. In addition, it is particularly important to note that a large number of people involved in robberies are teenagers, which raises concerns about the education and moral concepts of teenagers, hinting at that America has failed its education system and that China is the superior one. Now, the idea is to criticize and to say nothing is good, sort of like what I'm doing with China, but for America. But obviously, America has problems with these BLM riots, with the looting. It's true. But China takes it in a very twisted way. They use it to justify and to generalize that the backwardness of America is real, and that to create an idea in your head that nothing good comes out of America. Only the China model of governance is the correct way. Right? They talk about this rising east, falling west concept, and it's very apparent in disinformation campaigns. And together with censorship on domestic issues, so Chinese people are brainwashed, and many even take up the mantle, right, to be the protectors of the Chinese image. We call them little pinks or 50-cent armies. Now, the US government's Global Engagement Center released a special report called How the People's Republic of China Seeks to Reshape the Global Information Environment. And it highlights 3 areas that are specifically for the importance of the CCP's narrative war. And the first is overt and covert influence over content and platforms. And this is directly targeting the Western audience. Now, particularly English-speaking audience. Beijing seeks to maximize the reach of biased or false pro or PRC content. It has acquired stakes in foreign media through public and non-public means and sponsored online influencers. Now, obviously, this is a big scope in terms of who is included, right? So let's just do some individual cases. We have pro-CCP accounts on Twitter. These could be like regular people, CCP diplomats, influencers, as well as they're all over Facebook and YouTube, right? One of the unique things is what they do is pay these foreigners, like they're Westerners, maybe from the UK, from New Zealand, English-speaking people, right? And they're usually white for some reason. They often also have a Chinese name. They speak fluent Chinese, and they act in sync with the propaganda narratives, right? So like this guy here, Annie Bornham from New Zealand, he speaks really good Chinese, and he does reporting in both English and Chinese. His main focus is to defend China from all the negative portraying of China from us, right? The Western media. Now, in other cases, they also use actual reporters from the state media itself, like CGTN or the Global Times, and these personalities are on camera. They sometimes have different channels as well, and they speak English. Now, like this girl here, she does videos touring Xinjiang, which is only showing off the quote-unquote beautiful side of Xinjiang, ignoring the concentration camps and the persecution of the Uyghurs. None of these, though, are as effective as the social media part itself, and in particular with TikTok and Instagram. They both offer audience a much younger experience than what is being presented on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Facebook. Especially TikTok, which has become the CCP's way of shaping the next generation's daily lives. Now, disinformation or dissemination of propaganda is important, but not as important as how the CCP views cognitive warfare, which is to condition a generation of people. Now, this doesn't even have to apply to their view of the image of China. It goes much deeper than that. Right? With TikTok, it's a very apparent form of that. So from their priority in life, from the social beliefs, political ideology, gender ideology, all these things, China's figured out that the way to slowly destroy a generation is to introduce them to this digital opium. The classic communist propaganda doesn't work on the kids, right? What works instead are bending the perception of reality for these kids, seek materialism over morality, right? Drugs, sex, online addiction, these type of things. The pure pop culture entertainment aspect. So people are dancing to pop music instead of studying classical art. They're following makeup artists instead of reading Shakespeare. Sounds pretty superficial, right? Far-fetched, but that's exactly what the CCP wants. They want a generation of youth growing up in America to be useless, to not have a moral standard, to be not want to achieve anything in life. You want to be a pop culture influencer rather than an engineer. You want to be, rather than a scientist, you want to be a famous person online. You can call it a revenge for the Opium War in China, but it's a reality. TikTok has become a digital platform. It's a digital fentanyl. It's for the public, for the kids. Right? Former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov talked about this idea, the 4 stages of ideological subversion. So first step is to create a generation of young communists. It takes more than a decade. It's called demoralization. So to destroy the next generation, you have to cultivate them through their first 2 decades of lives, right? In their early 20s, they've been shaped enough to believe in a set of ideologies that are pro-communist, and that's going to be bad for the society. Now, the second one is, according to the report, it's called the Constraints on Global Freedom of Expression. Now, prior to November of 2022, when the Xinjiang apartment fired over the COVID lockdown, when it happened, before that, we were able to get more information from China relatively to today. But since then, Beijing has further increased censorship, and information dissemination has become very much one-sided. And this, what has created, is a problem with finding information from China now. It used to be that you have to differentiate between fake and real information. Now it's problems with you can't even get the information. And they've systematically eliminated some of the stuff, like data on unemployment rate or data on certain levels of what happened with COVID or things like that. Crematorium data. All of these things no longer exist. So it used to be you can find that, now you can't anymore. Now, the third, according to the report, is an emerging community of digital authoritarians. And the PRC promotes digital authoritarianism. And that means the evolvement of things like digital infrastructure, the Great Firewall, censorship, information, Chinese social media, police, all of these things, they regress freedom of expression, censor independent news, and promote disinformation. Right? All of these coincide with the ideas of removing journalists who are independent, like Zhang or Dr. Li Wenliang, who tried to expose the origin of COVID in China. And then you also have jailing of reporters who want to talk about certain social issues. Now, this has been an ongoing thing, but it is an effort by the CCP to shape what is essentially Xi Jinping's era of governance. Now, sometimes we talk about America in such a negative manner, right? You can criticize them. There's a ton of imperfections, tons of problems. But the idea here is that it's open to criticism, and it's open to improvement that way. We're not censored on the situation of the New York City subway or the riots or the looting. We're not censored on what happens on Capitol Hill. We know that things are flooded. We know that there's tornadoes, there's natural disasters. We know that there's a political crisis in the United States. But that process in itself, right, it's a reflection of the republic and its democratic processes. But does China have free and fair elections? They don't. Can China say the same thing about recent floods near Beijing? They can't. Does China show its own murders, jailing of dissidents, beating up women, or locking them up in chains or in prisons? They can't. It's simply because they ignore that whole idea of China and only try to portray what's bad about the United States and other countries. But that's not the point of the narrative campaign, right? It's not to expose themselves and also expose others. It's a one-way street. And when the fire of Maui happened in August this year, China's influence machine painted the event as a military weather weapon. And it turns out that they used AI-generated photos as evidence to support that. And then when it comes to COVID-19, they deliberately claimed that the US lab in Fort Detrick is where the virus came from instead of Wuhan. And then at one point, they even created a fake Swiss biologist named Wilson Edwards to cite a source, in which the Swiss government actually comes out openly refuting the existence of such Wilson Edwards. That was embarrassing. And then also, while disseminating information, it is part of this job of the propaganda department or the propaganda machine. Another one is about defending information. And this goes a lot with the Chinese dissidents and information availability in China. Now, for example, if a major event took place, say in the city of Shanghai, if you use the Chinese characters to search for Shanghai on Twitter, it only displays tweets, massive amounts of them, of naked girls and scam sites and these advertisements. The goal here is to prevent you from finding key information about the specific event. Now, if you say that there's a protest in Shanghai and you want to find it, you won't be able to search it as easily and find out what's happening because you're flooded with these. And if you search in English, it's okay. Now, why is English available yet the Chinese search returns pornographic bot accounts? Well, it's a different approach to dealing with the Chinese dissidents or Chinese influencers. Rather than cognitive conditioning against the Westerners, it is a restriction on the access of information, right? Flood their page with porn accounts. And so most sources come from China first, and they come to Chinese language users, say on Twitter and YouTube. So many of the sources that they get from China then gets the English ones written after or retweeted after from the Chinese users. And so these accounts, once they can target the Chinese dissidents or the Chinese profiles, then they can eliminate some of the attention from that. Okay, and you'll see this every time. There will be a certain important event happening in particular cities, and then you immediately search that city and you're met with all these pornographic scams. Now, you could say that this is how the CCP propaganda system works, but that's just one part of it. Normally, we understand the entire thing as propaganda, but inside the CCP, it's a division system. There's propaganda in almost every apparatus within the Chinese government. So there's Public Security Ministry, there's the which is the police. There's the propaganda from the State Security Ministry, which is like the FBI, and that there's propaganda from the Central Propaganda Department. There's the United Front Department, the Cyber Administration. There's the Party Liaison Department. There's the state media as well. So it's a very convoluted and complex part of the propaganda system. But you can't really pinpoint who is running these bot accounts or different types of commenters on YouTube and other platforms. Sometimes they even overlap in duties, and some other times they divide and conquer. What we do know that, though, they're very fast, which means it's a big setup within the Chinese government to do this. The second an event breaks out in China, you'll see these accounts on Twitter. And you might be wondering, why Twitter, right? It's because Twitter, it's the primary information dissemination platform. Since Elon Musk has taken over, rebranding to X.com, Twitter has drawn a new set of CCP bots, right? These are the porn accounts that are even more active. They have these real photos of girls, and they obviously found it somewhere. And so here are some of the screenshots of them, right? They look like they may be real people on Twitter, but again, just fake accounts. Then there's also official study groups of the Xi Jinping administration. So this is a political group ran by Xi's daughter, and they have special tasks to create a positive image of Xi Jinping on Twitter. Like this account here, Xi's Moment. It posts quotes, images, photos, videos of Xi Jinping. It's an attempt to portray him as a nice and personable leader rather than a dictator. Or the daughter's own account called My Moment. It also posts quotes, videos, and images of Xi as well. The strategy here is very simple. It's create an identity that it's nice and peaceful at home, justify the legitimacy through false narratives, and then blame the rest of the world for the problems that arises in China. And then they can amplify the negative side of things, right, for its enemies like the US, Japan, and whoever else needs it to be, and then project it outside with different levels of influencers or platforms. Now, how do we differentiate between these pro-CCP accounts or their deliberate propaganda movements and all that is around the CCP's influence machine? Well, watch my show. But jokes aside, the best thing you can do is become more educated. There's great books on China. One that I really recommend about this topic is a book called China's Civilian Army, The Making of Warrior Diplomacy by Peter Martin. He's a Bloomberg reporter. So it details how CCP diplomats evolved into the wolf warrior today, which they also use to spread disinformation. I also think that the U.S. State Department should have a whole task force to make media videos like where they identified a false narrative or a propaganda from the CCP. Just like what the Swiss government did to come out to contradict that Wilson Edwards fake biologist thing. Also, there's a ton of ways you can go about finding if the source is true. Distrust and verify. That's former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's speech, right? He talked about the new Cold War with China, and he says that if the CCP claims something, it's better to find out where it comes from, but don't trust it first, right? In the old Soviet way, it was trust and then verify, but now it's distrust and then verify. But this isn't really about the Chinese people. It's about what we're dealing with is a government that has co-opted and hijacked the people to be used as weapons. So in this war of disinformation, do not trust anything from the CCP. Even if it means that they're generating a new war against us, you would never be able to know. But so what the best thing you can do is just to protect yourself by distrusting it and then verifying it. All right, that's it today for the episode on China's disinformation campaign, how it's working to use every resource and billions of dollars to achieve it. I'm David Zhang, this is China Insider. If you enjoyed the content, leave a comment about your thoughts on this. Leave a like as well, and also subscribe to our channel. All right, until next time, bye-bye.